Hello, world. My next guest is an award-winning content marketing professional with more than 13 years of experience leading global content teams. She's passionate about creating impactful, human-first content strategies that drive brand differentiation in the market. As the director of content marketing at HiBob, she leads teams across Tel Aviv and London and shapes HiBob's voice while establishing the company as a leader in the HR space. Thrilled to have her here. Please join me in welcoming Shelby Blitz, Director of Content Marketing at HiBob, to the show. Shelby, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
I'm ready. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Shelby, the feeling is mutual. You are a force in the B2B marketing space. I think everyone in Tel Aviv certainly knows your name, and I'm sure in London as well. The things you're doing at HiBob are outstanding. And we
Thank
follow
you.
your brand on LinkedIn actually pretty closely because your social is also, spot on. So anybody listening in, if you're looking how to do social right, head over to HiBob's LinkedIn feed and take a look what they're doing from the polls, the campaigns, the images, the branding. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. I have to give major props to our social media manager, Ale, for that. She really, sets the tone on all of our social channels. So, shout out to her. Big shout out to her for
Big
that.
shout out to you, Ale.
Yeah.
So listen, social media, you guys are doing it really well. Now, I know as someone who lives and breathes content, and you've been doing this for quite some time. I mean, 13 years. I mean,
Crazy.
10 years makes you an expert. 13 years is just insane. And then when you look at how fast our industry moves with trends and what we need to keep on top of, right? Hats off. When we're thinking about the way content has evolved and what B2B organizations are, thinking now in terms of, creating engaging content or, social or the pains of a content marketer, right? What is keeping you up these days professionally?
Good question. A lot. But if I had to pick two things, I think the first is really about the people on my team. Like you mentioned, I have team members here in Tel Aviv and also in London. And my one of my biggest focuses is just making sure that they're growing and they're learning and they're taking on more responsibility and getting more creative and happy in their roles and engaged in their roles. I think that's so important, of course, at any organization, but it's something that we really take seriously at HiBob. So that is at the t very top of my list. And then on top of that, it's how can we actually create a lot of content? There's a big request, big need for content across the organization, but how can we be smart about it and kind of squeeze the most juice out of every piece of content that we're creating and not kind of work ourselves crazy and be smart. So these things kind of go together, right? It's like about my people being happy and growing and taking on more, but also not, driving ourselves nuts and having a work-life balance and kind of doing everything we can with every single piece of content that we're creating, whether that's for social or otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. Keeping you up at night. People and math sounds about right as a marketing leader.
100%. And math is
Right?
not my strong suit. So
Number of assets and, making sure the people are happy. I'm right there with you. Thinking about making sure you're getting, the juice squeezed out of every asset. And I think that's a lot of our fears, right? We want to take risks, we want to try new things, but we also want to make sure the content that we're creating has, a legitimate, long and good and successful shelf life, if you will. So with this constant demand for content, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon, we have, I mean, we can go on where it lives forever and where to reach our customers, and it's everywhere and anywhere. But how are you striking a balance between creating enough content without overwhelming your team and resources, right? I know you mentioned that's something that's keeping you up at night. So how are you balancing that?
great question. I think it's tricky, right? Because on the one hand, we do have numbers that we have to meet in terms of the amount of content that we're producing, and we have limited resources. We do work with agencies to help kind of get some of that content written, which I'm really grateful that we have the budget to do that. But I think also it's about planning really well. And we do quarterly planning as a content organization. And that process is pretty intense. So that process, I can walk you through it really kind of quickly. Basically, what we do on a quarterly basis is I meet with a bunch of different stakeholders across the organization. So that's our demand generation team, customer marketing, product marketing, our regional marketing managers, a whole bunch of folks. And I hear from them kind of like, what are their needs in terms of content? What are the topics that they're hearing about that they think we need to be tackling? Uh, and I get a ton, like a download of information from all these people, a ton of information, which is awesome. And then I take that back to my team and I say, hey, have a look at all this information. We have X amount of slots in our editorial calendar for this quarter. How should we fill them, right? Like, how can we meet the most needs with the amount of content that we're producing, right? Because you'll hear from one, let's say, regional marketing manager, oh, we really need content around women in the workplace. Awesome. And then you'll hear from product marketing, oh, we're doing research on women in the workplace. Great. So we have a couple of needs met in hopefully one piece of content there. So my team takes all that information, they do a lot of thinking and brainstorming. We do an editorial pitch meeting as a team, and then we kind of fill out what that calendar is going to look like, take it back to all those stakeholders and say, hey, this is the plan. Raise a red flag now if you think there's something missing that you really need, or, whatever the red flag could possibly be. If we get thumbs up, we go into production. We kind of have very clear transparency on when things are going to be published, where people can find drafts. We have a whole kind of master spreadsheet for that. Um, and we go from there. So it's really about planning, which is really challenging at times because things change, of course, in high tech and in fast moving companies things are changing all the time, so we do build some flexibility into there as well. We're not like super rigid about it, but we do try and plan, and that way I can balance my resources. I can make sure that we're meeting the numbers we need to be meeting and that we're kind of meeting also the needs across the organization with the resources that we have.
I think
Yeah.
that's really fascinating. I started my marketing career on the social side and, moved over to customer product marketing. And I always find the role of content, it's so critical and so important. And the amount of stakeholders that content needs to work with, it's insane. I mean, marketers in general, right? But
Totally.
get the story right. I once heard a saying that was right, if you can't distribute so you're making on the content, you can't distribute your content properly, then what's the point of creating it at all? Something along those lines, right? So
Yeah.
you walk us through or talk us through, yes, we want to be getting the value of every asset created. What are some of the strategies that you have in place to make sure that you're repurposing that content across effective channels and making sure that not only are you creating it, but it's getting seen, by the right people at the right time at the right place?
Yes. Great question again. So I think let's talk about social first. So from a social perspective, we don't post every single piece of content we create on our organic channels. There's just like way too much, and it would be overwhelming to our audience. So after that kind of master plan is created, Ale, our social media manager, kind of picks and chooses rather the pieces of content that she thinks are going to perform well on social based on history and the data that she's seeing. And she's running tests all the time on our channels to see what people are engaging with. And so she puts together her kind of a strategy for organic social that she knows or she believes will kind of meet her KPIs. We also have a demand generation team, and they're using our content within their program. So we have a bunch of always on marketing campaigns, and we're always adding new content into those campaigns because these are kind of our main topic campaigns that are constantly running. And so like I said, I meet with performance marketing as part of this process, and they can then understand kind of what's coming their way to add into those campaigns and kind of make sure that they're always fresh and up to date and all of that stuff. Additionally, our regional marketing managers, who are also again part of that input, have events. They run a ton of events globally, and a lot of that comes with sales outreach emails where pre-event and post-event. It comes with speaker sessions at these events. It comes with a lot of different ways to take, let's say, a guide that has been written and repurpose it into a speaker session, and then follow up that speaker session afterwards with the PDF of that guide, and really like piecing apart these different pieces of content to kind of fill every spot in their flow of work as best as possible. Um, so I think honestly, it's really about that like input process, right? Because when all of these different stakeholders are inputting into this editorial calendar and are able to kind of give a thumbs up or raise a red flag if something's missing or something doesn't appear that they need, um, they know then that they're going to get what they need
Yeah.
for their program. So it's this kind of like input output flow that I think allows us to make sure that all of our content is being used as much as possible. I mean, it's not a perfect system, obviously, nothing is, but we try. We try really hard to make sure that it is that way.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned, which I think you're spot on, right? So you're going through all these different channels, you're making sure that the content is being, distributed properly, right? And you mentioned something when it comes to social, which I thought was very interesting. You shared that your social media manager will sift through all the content because not all the content you're creating may perform well or resonate well with the audience that you're trying to build on your social channels. But
Yep.
it kind of had my wheels going because there's a fine line between, right, engaging your audience. And as you said, like in general, social media can be overwhelming. Like just open your LinkedIn, go to your feed, and suddenly, you're bombarded with content. And our job as marketers, like, right, how do you stop the feed? How do you get that attention? So
Yeah.
how are you, or what advice can you give around how you can engage your audience without overwhelming them too much with content or noise and like right that there's always like that debate. Is it valuable content? Is it noise? Valuable content isn't noise. Like how are you
Yeah.
looking at that? How do you make that balance and
Yeah, it's really hard, but I will say, like, my biggest piece of advice, I think, would be around testing, and seeing what is actually working, what is making people stop on their feed. So, for example, we just ran a test that took one piece of content. It was a guide, and we had it made into a carousel. We had it made into a moving carousel. We did just a link post, and it was posted the same time, same day of the week, one week after another to see kind of like, okay, what's working the best here? We actually thought that the moving kind of carousel video would work the best, and it actually didn't. The thing that worked the best was a regular carousel, which we kind of, thought it was going to be between those two, but thought the video would do better, and it didn't. Um, and so I think it's really important to test and see what's actually making people stop, because otherwise it's like such a guessing game. I think also I think about like when I'm scrolling on social, like what's making me stop, and then trying to incorporate that into what we're doing. So our social media manager will often say like puppies and babies, can we do more puppies and babies? And when we have puppies and babies, which we never have babies, but puppies, and it's related to our audience, right? Like
yeah.
we're an HR platform, so we talk a lot about work experience and dogs in the office, like that was a big that's a big conversation starter. We do allow dogs in our office. We have tons of pictures of dogs in our office. And we did a post about that. Like, what do you think about dogs in the office? And that
I
post
actually
performed
remember that one. I think there was
crazy.
also a poll, and I believe I answered it.
Yes,
It's
100%.
one of the most interesting LinkedIn feeds I've ever seen. You're really fun to follow. So again, I'm going to put that shout out there. If
Yeah,
anyone listening in is looking for a really cool way that a B2B organization does social on LinkedIn, check out HiBob. But I remember this poll. I know the dog pictures, and I think it's a
so
brilliant
funny.
strategy.
Yeah, I think that's really like we want to be fun, we want to be genuine, we want to be engaging and friendly, but we also still have to connect to who we're trying to target, which is HR people. And so it can't just be puppies for puppy's sake. But how can we tie puppies into some work-related trend, or how can we tie some, I don't know, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce at the Super Bowl. There was some, kind of memes that were made out of a picture of them last year. How can we use that but make it HR? Like that is really what we're trying to do on our social channels to get people to kind of stop, engage, laugh, hopefully. But it's a balance between that stuff and also like educational materials that like are just as important
Yeah.
on social media. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting is it kind of leads me into my next question. When, so you mentioned like the education materials and, the engaging materials and the engaging content. It's about consistency, right? So we know as marketers, there are so many channels available to us to use, and marketing owns most, not all, but most. And I think what's hard is to maintain consistency across messaging for a website, social, even internal channels. I know you mentioned, you're going to double down on content, for the coming year. How, as a leader, what are some of the things that you're doing to make sure that the consistency in messaging is maintained, even though we have to be, using the voices and the tones of these different channels to appeal to different people? What's like that unifying hack or thing that you do to keep everything consistent?
Yeah, I wish I could say I had a hack. I definitely don't. But what I will say is we have very clear tone of voice guidelines and writing style guidelines. And it's something that I and the rest of my team follow, you know, very strictly. And it's also something that we communicate around the organization, right? Like when new joiners start and there are people who I know are going to be writing content, right? Like some of our regional marketing managers are writing a landing page for a webinar that they're hosting, or, you know, our employee experience manager who's writing some social posts for recruitment and stuff like that. I do like a little training for them. 30 minutes. I walk them through everything, and that's kind of the best way that I could say how, like that's worked for us is to just try and grasp onto those people who we know don't sit inside our content team. They might not even sit inside marketing. But we know that part of their role, or at least, if like it's 50% or of their role, then they should know our tone of voice. And I honestly make myself available to them as well to like review stuff, at least in the beginning, and give feedback and try and mentor a little bit. The other thing I'll say is that I'm working with our um, content design lead. So our content design lead is like the people in the product organization who write all of the copy that goes in our product. And we have a very copy heavy product. Um, we are working together on a content guild that is cross organization. So it's getting together kind of all of the writers from marketing, from our HR department, from the product side, and working together to kind of make sure that we're all aligned in tone of voice, make sure that we have some like cool cross-functional projects to work on together. And that's something we're launching actually well, it's October 31st, but we're launching it in November. Yeah, happy Halloween. We're launching in November. So I'm really excited about that because I think like this one-on-one thing that I've been doing was good when we were a smaller organization. We're over 1,000 employees now, and it's just not scalable as a one-on-one situation. So hopefully, this content guild will also help. But again, like no hack. It's just a lot of like me being on people and reminding and things like that, but it's difficult. And it's not going to be perfect. I think that's the other thing I always also have to remind myself and my team is like it's never going to be perfect. And sometimes things are going to go out. People are going to write stuff that's not 100% on brand, on our tone of voice. And like, it's okay. Like, take a deep breath. It's all good. We'll survive. Um, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard. It's a challenge.
So many of us marketers, I feel, are recovering perfectionists. So I understand that. And,
Yeah.
it's funny. I think it's actually very unique that you meet with so many individuals in the organization or teams to walk through tone. It's really, it's neat to hear because I actually don't hear that as frequently. And I actually hold maybe a very rare belief that everyone in the organization, no matter where you work, is a marketer, whether they know it or not. But I
100%.
hold I hold my colleagues across departments to very high standards, whether they know it or not, as marketers. And I think that as marketers, right, and what you're saying about communicating with your teams, we need to be not only great at external communication, but also internal communication. And I think that when you shared how you speak and train and help and talk through tone and guidelines across the organization, it gives non-marketers in the org, the confidence to be able to go on LinkedIn and write a post or write an email in that right tone. But that I know that you guys are running an employee advocacy program. Anyone listening in, your employee advocacy is basically a way that you give your employees content to share to amplify your voice. And there's so much more to it than that. And I feel we would need a whole new episode to talk specifically about employee advocacy. But as
Yeah.
someone leading content, I think one of the things I'm dying to ask you is when it comes to advocacy, how are you ensuring that the content that the advocates share is authentic and meaningful, just like you would on the corporate side? Because when I think about advocacy, right, the tone is in first person usually, or right, they need to be positioned as thought leaders. And I know you mentioned you meet with different stakeholders on the team. Are you writing and creating content also specifically for advocates, or how do you, in the content strategy, where does advocacy play a role? And can we kind of take a moment and just dive a little bit into,
Yeah.
what it looks like and how it contributes to your content strategy?
For sure. So, as opposed to our corporate channels, where, like I said earlier, like not every piece of content is going to go on those channels, almost every single piece of content goes into advocacy,
Got it.
because and it's tagged by all sorts of stuff, so people can find, what's relevant to them. And thank you, Oktopost. And it comes with pre-written copy that our social media manager writes. But we encourage people, and I'm so happy that we've seen this go up. We encourage people to write their own copy and edit what is there for them because, like you said, it should feel more personal and it should feel like we don't want 50 people posting the same thing with the same text, like
Yeah.
people are going to catch on that that's not authentic and that's not someone writing it for themselves. So everything goes into advocacy so that people have kind of a wealth of choice in terms of like what is relevant to them, what do they connect with and feel like they want to share with their audience. We also have certain things that only go into advocacy and like are not part of like our regular content strategy, right? So like we have some like DIY kind of sales events that like we don't actually market in our like demand generation programs, but these are things that our sales team is doing kind of with our regional marketing managers DIY style, and all of that stuff definitely goes into advocacy because it's super relevant to them. They want these events out and shared with their audience. So sometimes people will ask, like, I need this on social. This must go on social, like across the business. This is like, I don't think this is special to us. I think every social media manager deals with this, where like everyone just thinks that everything at all times should go on social media. And something that we always go back with, if we don't feel that it will help us hit our KPIs or isn't really relevant to our corporate channels, we'll say, okay, totally understand. Like, this is something important to you. Here's why we're not going to post it on our corporate channels, but here's why we will put it into advocacy. And typically, I would say 99% of the time, people are really like fine with that, like because it's really just about getting the word out. And honestly, like I think you can obviously speak from experience here, is that like the posts that go out from people do incredibly well as opposed to like some stuff that would go up on our corporate channels, right? Because people want to talk to people, they want to hear from other people. They don't necessarily, although I wish they did more, want to hear from a company, right? Like they really want to hear from other people. So a lot of times just putting something into advocacy that we wouldn't put on our corporate channels, like those posts do really, really well through advocacy. And that's really all you can ask for ultimately. It's like we just want to get the word out. We want to get these impressions up on the specific program or activity. And advocacy is like the perfect platform to do that. And it honestly helps us a lot to give an alternative instead of having to just say no,
Yeah.
which no one wants to do?
Totally. I think
So,
well, what I'm hearing, just to tie it back to kind of how we opened the show, is that, right, one of the things keeping you up at night is making sure your people are happy. And I think what's really commendable is that it sounds like you've also found a way not only to keep your own team happy and, check in and making sure that they're happy and growing in their roles, but what you've done with the advocacy program and how you've divided what goes on corporate and what goes in the advocacy program, you're also keeping, the village happy. You're keeping the rest of the team and the entire organization happy because if they need to share something, there's a place for that as well, even if it's not living necessarily, on the corporate channel or perhaps, wherever else it may live. So I think that's really great. Like you found a way to keep many people happy. So that's fantastic. And I hope and wish you only continued happiness and success for the team and the
thank
entire
you.
organization. As we end out the show, I have one last question for you, Shelby. And this one, I know we talked a little bit about, how advocacy keeps you authentic. So from me to you, what's one thing that you can share about yourself that we actually can't learn about you from LinkedIn or listening to this podcast?
Great question. Well, maybe you could learn this by just hearing me speak. I live in Tel Aviv, but I grew up in Chicago, and I am a cold-blooded Chicagoan by nature. Yeah, I don't survive in that cold weather that well anymore, but Chicago is my favorite place in the world. And anyone wants recommendations, things to do in Chicago, places to eat, anything, feel free. Find me on LinkedIn. You can you can message me about that or anything else here. But I think yeah, I have had most of my professional career in Tel Aviv. And so I think most people, at least here, see me as someone, like that this is where I am, but Chicago is deep, deep in my heart.
Like the
And
pizza crust, right? It's deep, deep Chicago.
exactly. Deep Chicago dish pizza heart. That's who I am. So yeah, I don't have that thick of an accent. So that's why maybe you couldn't tell a Chicago accent. But yeah, I would say that's one thing about me that you wouldn't know from this podcast otherwise.
Shelby Blitz, Director of Content Marketing at HiBob. Thank you so much for getting radically transparent today. We look forward to seeing you on social, following HiBob on LinkedIn, and continuing the conversation. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.